of you to the annual Fur Rendezvous Pioneer Stories Dinner Theater. I am Judy Weimer. I'm one of the co-chairmen of this event. And my other chairman, James, some of you knew him. He worked here for years and years. His father is ill, and he had to go to Puerto Rico to help his dad. So he apologizes for not being here. The other person I want to mention is Bobby Taylor. She is an event staff person here, and she stepped in for James and did all our decorations and everything. So we want to thank her. And many thanks to all who made tonight possible. Anyone that's run an event knows it isn't one or two people, it's a team. And we've had wonderful people to help put this on tonight. We have our speakers. We thank them for volunteering to be here and be in our program tonight. Thank you. And we have our kitchen staff that is fixing a wonderful meal for us. And we have staff and other volunteers, our servers, and those people. So thank you all for coming. And I'd like to introduce our General Manager and our MC, Rebecca Parker. But I get to tell lies about her. No, I'm telling the truth. Okay, she has over 30 years of recognized achievement in business, civic, and political arenas. Her professional activities include philanthropic and fundraising program management, public relations, marketing, advertising, and special events. She has served as major gifts officer for the Blood Bank of Alaska, stakeholder relations manager for Alaska Pipeline Service Company, special assistant to the Commissioner of Health and Social Services for the state of Alaska, and president of the Providence, Alaska Foundation. She represented ARCO Foundation in Alaska during most of her 20 years in community and public affairs. She has served on many community and professional boards and commissions. She is past president of the Anchorage Downtown Rotary Club, among many other activities. Some of her many awards include the YMCA Women of Achievement Award, the Athena Award, and the Anchorage School District Volunteer of the Year. And she was honored last year by her alma mater, Oregon State, as their Alumni Fellow of the Year. So we are very honored and pleased to have as our mistress of ceremony our General Manager, Rebecca Parker.
Thank you, Judy, and good evening. Welcome. We have a lot we're celebrating tonight. First, Pioneer Dinners, and I've been here 3 years, and I just have to say, this is the one evening we all look forward to. And then, don't forget, next week we have another Pioneer Dinner with 4 more speakers. So we'd like to welcome you. And we're also celebrating our 35th anniversary of the Anchorage Senior Activity Center. Woohoo! So I'd just like to say, please watch your newsletter and community events, because we're going to be doing a lot of things to celebrate this year at the Senior Center. So I think we'll start by introducing our head table, and they will be formally introduced later in the program. But let's start with sitting next to me, Dolores Benjamin, spouse of our speaker, Richard. Where's Richard? Oh, okay. Anyway, he'll be right back. And then we have Abbe Hensley and Willie Hensley. And we have a guest of Laurie McKeown, who's seated at the end. Her guest is Brian Armagos. And so this is our head table and our distinguished speakers for the evening. Please welcome them. I just have to tell a few stories before we start. I, too, would like to echo our thanks to our volunteers and to Judy and Pete and Bobby and James L. Garrico, who couldn't be here tonight. They are the team, and they have a lot of support. But I want to tell you, it is just like spring cleaning around here when Pioneer Stories come. You have never seen anything like this unless you lived at my home with my mother. We start cleaning chairs when Pete and Judy come. We get all the dishes out and wash and hand do every one of them, each piece of silverware, every glass. And so I want you to know we really prepare for you and a lovely evening of enjoyment. But it's a lot of fun and it's a lot of hard work. So when we're going to formally thank Judy later in the program as well, but just wanted to share with you all that goes into it. Our music tonight is absolutely by the most talented group of musicians and singers. We have a family, Delynn Gleason, Nathaniel Gleason, and Carl Gleason. Welcome and thank you. So we're going to start. I know you've started eating your salad, but we're going to do the flag song first. And so I'm going to ask you in your program to open your program to the words if you need them. And I think it's Carl is going to lead us in the Alaska flag song. So if you will stand, and the flag song, the flag is right over here. Okay.
Okay, ready? Go. 8 stars of gold on a field of blue, Alaska's flag, may it mean to you the blue of the sea, the evening sky, the mountain lakes and flowers nearby, the gold of the early sourdough's dreams, the precious gold of the hills and streams, the brilliant stars in the northern sky, the Bear, the Dipper, and shining high, the great North Star with its steady light over land and sea, a beacon bright. Alaska's flag to Alaskans dear, the simple flag of Alaska's frontier.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you. We're going to start, before we introduce our speakers, in recognition that the Senior Center has been open for 35 years. I went through their archives, which was file folders, and found information about the history of the Senior Center. I also had a very reliable source, my mother, and her name was Florence Orr. She's no longer with us. And in this, you'll find out she was the first president of this center, first appointed and first elected. So I learned a lot listening to her, and she had got me involved 35 years ago, so I've been around too. So this is a brief history, and I found it very interesting to find out some of this stuff that I didn't know and some that I did. So please listen. The Anchorage Senior Activity Center is celebrating its 35th anniversary of service in the Anchorage Bowl area this year, 2018. How did we get here? Let's go back to the 1970s. With the rising population of seniors in the Anchorage area, there was a recognizable need for senior services. The late Rose Palmquist and people forget this, she didn't do this alone, and there were key seniors living in Anchorage who formed a committee to look into establishing a senior center right here. Their goal was to establish a facility so that seniors could maintain an active and healthy lifestyle. When this idea was presented to the city planners, their answer was, oh, well, you can use the old schoolhouse down on 3rd Avenue. That was not accepted as an adequate facility. And this offer spurred the original group to acquire a state-of-the-art facility as their mission. The governor, the senators, and the representatives in Juneau were all contacted, and support was gained for Anchorage Senior Center at its present location. It was established as a result of the Older American Act that was passed by Congress in 1965. Anchorage had facilities for children. Well, they had the Fairview Rec Center and the Spenard Rec Center. And the founding members of the committee felt seniors needed a place to go too. They felt that if kids could have a center, so should the senior citizens of Anchorage. In 1976, the Municipal Senior Advisory Committee was established. 2 years later, in 1978, mind you, this is only 2 years later, $800,000 was appropriated for the Anchorage Senior Center from the state bond issue. Governor Sullivan, the mayor of Anchorage at the time, appointed the management board in May of 1981. The officers were my mother, Florence Orr, president, Gerald Markey as vice president, Mary Carl, my algebra teacher, as secretary, and Nona Vickers as treasurer. Other members were Alfred Algaron, Clarence Coleman, Laverne Hill, Tessie Kardanoff, Harold Maxwell, Esther McGilligut, and Martha Waldrop. The building was scheduled for completion in July of 1981 and was completely paid for before construction was ever begun. However, during construction, a fire totally destroyed a half-finished senior center. And my husband likes to tell the story. My mother was more upset by that than the fire she had about the same time in her own home. Luckily, the project was covered by insurance, and reconstruction started immediately. The center was officially opened in March of 1983, with normal operations commencing on April 4th of that year. It officially opened with 400 members. It was originally named the Anchorage, or Anchor, ANCHOR, -Age Center, Incorporated. It is a nonprofit corporation under the IRS 501c3 standard. This beautiful brick building is centrally located between downtown Anchorage and Midtown. And if you didn't know the address, it's 1300 East 19th Avenue. It is situated on 5 acres of land with ample parking, plus the people movers stop here and provide bus service, and the Anchor rides give door-to-door transportation. The center and the surrounding grounds are owned by the municipality of Anchorage. The center is accredited by the National Institute of Senior Centers and the National Council on Aging. This is something to be very proud of, because less than 200 senior centers in the entire nation are certified. We're one that is. Programs were established and have continued to flourish over the past 35 years, with health and fitness a top priority for members. Some of the earliest programs that were established near the very, very beginning and are still going today are the health fair, arts and crafts classes, income tax assistance, Thursday night bingo, Wednesday afternoon social hour, the endowment trust fund, and monthly birthday parties, which were started as a Girl Scout Gold Award project by Diane Ware. Would Diane's mother and dad please stand? They are here with us tonight. Oh, they're waving, they're over here. Diane Ware started this monthly birthday party, and it is still going today, 35 years later. As the years went by, the fitness program became so large, the exercise classes had to be held where you are, in the ballroom. The craft room and the art room became overcrowded with seniors and their supplies. So in 1998, a fund drive was started to pay for the expansion of the center. A new wing was added in 2002. This was to accommodate the growth not only in programs, but as well as the growth of people in Anchorage that were of 55 years or older. Also added was the art sculpture in our front lobby, made with glass beads, called The Migration. So please, if you have never looked up, it's very beautiful. Next came the Arctic Rose restaurant expansion in 2005. This substantially increased the size of the kitchen and enhanced the food service. This made it possible for the center to get a contract with Kids Corps Head Start to provide meals. And in the record I had, it said 365 children at 5 school sites on a weekly basis. I'm sure that's not the exact figure now, but that's what it was when it started. Now, who oversaw, besides the board, this facility and made sure it kept running? Well, our first executive director of the Anchorage Senior Center was Betsy Grazer. Following her was David Hernam. Then came Billy Lewis. She was probably here the longest time. Then came Roseanne Alexander, Celeste Benson, Kathy Lee, and presently our general manager, the title changed, but the same position, Rebecca Parker. The center provides today a broad range of group and individual activities and services that respond to the needs and interests of older adults, families, and caregivers. The mission of the Anchorage Senior Activity Center is to enhance the quality of life of seniors by managing a well-equipped facility with skilled staff who promote fitness, health, and social interaction in a wide range of activities, programs, and services. Happy birthday. Happy 35th anniversary, I should say, Anchorage Senior Activity Center.
Thank you, Judy. It just brings up all the thoughts of what we're doing here every day and how we're impacting lives. And it's just very fulfilling to be here and to see what we're doing for our seniors. Thank you for that. So I think we'll go ahead and start with our program. How's that? All right. Our first speaker tonight is Abbe Hensley. Abbe Hensley has been a leader in early learning, education, and family engagement issues for many years. She is the founding executive director of the Best Beginnings in 2006, a statewide public-private partnership that mobilizes people and resources to ensure all Alaska children begin school ready to succeed. Prior to this, she began her work with the Educational Children's Television and Community Outreach at KAKM-TV in Anchorage in 1993, and then spent 2 years running Ready to Learn at WETA, Washington, D.C.'s public television station, before moving on to PBS. At PBS, she spent 5 years as the Director of Outreach Services for the PBS Ready to Learn, a program funded by the U.S. Department of Education. This was a nationwide effort proven to help parents and early childhood educators increase children's early literacy skills and prepare them for success in school. Currently, Abbe is a member of the Alaska Early Childhood Coordinating Council and holds leadership positions with a 90% by 2020 community partnership and a RISE, 2 community-based initiatives in Anchorage focused on improving educational outcomes. She served on the Alaska State Board of Education and the Alaska State Medical Board, as president of Alaska PTA, and as vice president for leadership for the National PTA, along with other volunteer activities in Anchorage and Kotzebue. She and her husband, Willie Hensley, have 4 children who were born and raised in Alaska. And happily, they've all returned to raise their own families. She is committed to seeing that not only their 14 grandchildren, but all Alaska children are ready for school and set for life. Will you please give a warm welcome to Abbe Hensley?
Good evening, everybody. And I'm really happy to be here tonight, and thank you, Judy, wherever you have gone to, for inviting me and for persisting to make sure that I provided her all the information that she needed before tonight began. I would like to start by asking you to take a look at this picture here of my grandparents' house. And my grandparents, Louis and Aline Strutz, came to Alaska like many people have done over the years and continuing to do for work. They were from Washington and Montana, and grandfather came in 1919. They raised 6 children in this house, one of whom is here tonight with us, my uncle Dick Strutz. He's back here. And they always had a house full. My mother tells the stories about there always being, sort of room for 1 more and 2 more or 3 more around the dinner table. I think there were some families who sent their kids to the Strutzes for dinner. And my mother and her sisters in particular, because the boys were a little bit younger, but my mother and her sisters did some kind of crazy things, which I think their mother didn't really know about until afterward. The one thing that really stuck out in my mind is that they would go down on the train trestle and wait for the train to come along, and then they'd hang off the side while the train went over. So, something that I'm sure my grandmother didn't know about at the time. And their house at 9th and P Street was really considered to be out of town at that time. The other stories, are about walking to school in the snowbank with, snowbanks over your head, uphill both ways. We heard those stories, as you probably have as well. Oh, this is working fabulous. This is my parents. My father was originally from Connecticut. His family relocated to Southern California during the Great Depression, and he came up from California to Anchorage when he was 16. He came with his older brother to work at Emard's cannery. And so, remember that house full of 4 girls over at the 9th and P Street? And so, he got to know them. And even before that, both he and my mother were 16 at the time. And in order to go to work, they had to get Social Security numbers. So as they stood in line to get their Social Security numbers, they learned afterward that there was one person standing between them. And I don't know why, over the years, we haven't tried to find that person, who stood between the two of you while you were getting your Social Security numbers. But my father's older brother, Uncle Johnny, who he had come up with, ended up marrying my Aunt Joanne, my mother's the second oldest girl in the family. And one of the things, too, that I remember, that I think about with my mother is that the lifelong friends that she has, and that she still has. I mean, you might have seen recently the story in the newspaper about Lucy Whitehead, who's now at the Pioneer Home. That's one of my mom's friends. And June Reese, who she grew up with as well, who lives in California, and they see each other fairly often. So that connection with friends growing up is something I think that's important to keep in mind. And it's something that our own children, Willie's and mine, have because of their growing up here in Anchorage, that they, while they're in their 30s and 40s now, but they still know friends from when they were in kindergarten. And I think that that's really important. I made my first trip over the Alcan in 1946, and stories about that include the fact that I threw socks out the window. I was a year and a half old. Threw socks out the window, so they had to go back and get them because nobody at that time could afford to go without a pair of socks. And the other story was, of my mother washing the cloth diapers, of course, at that time, overnight, and hanging them on the radio antenna as they drove along so that they would dry as they drove. And I've made several more trips over the Alcan with my family. Sometimes it seemed like, as we went between California and here, that we were migrant ed kids before there was such a thing. We would sometimes leave school, or leave a town before the end of school, and but we did travel up and down the Alcan several times. I think my last trip might have been in 1956, and I have not been on that road since. This is one of the activities that I don't remember, but obviously it happened because we have photos of swimming at Lake Spenard. And the thing that always struck me about this picture is the little water shoes or whatever that I had on, because that was a thing that you did to make sure you didn't step on rocks, or that the what are those, the sucker things out there didn't get you, the leeches. I wanted to share with you this picture of my grandparents. They're holding my cousins Bob and Walt Hickle. We called him Walt at the time. And as they were growing up, and we all spent quite a lot of time together, this is a picture of many of the cousins. Remember, we had these 6 siblings, and many of their children are in this picture. And one of the things, too, in my grandmother's front yard was a swing set, which we all played on. And I remember doing circus tricks on the swing set and singing that song, How Much Is That Little Dog in the Window? That was a big song at the time. And I remember it was, we were putting on the show and singing that song on the swing set. And another thing around about this time, too, is that, my Aunt Ermelie and her big crowd of boys, she ordered cowboy outfits for them from Sears or someplace. And I remember thinking, oh, maybe one will come and it will be a cowgirl outfit, and she'll have to give it to me. Well, as it turned out, there was one that was a cowgirl outfit, but no, she didn't give it to me. I was really disappointed. Another thing, there were big birch trees in our grandparents' yard, and it was really fun to peel off the bark, kind of like paper. Oh, we got in trouble for that. And then my cousins who are here and my uncle will remember all the raspberry bushes and how fun it was to pick raspberries there. And you could hardly pick raspberries there and not eat them, so of course we did. And also Grandma's garden, which was fabulous. And she wasn't really keen on letting other people mess around in her garden. But we always had great food. And she was really an internationally known expert in wildflowers, and there I think were a couple that were named for her. So she went all over Alaska, to the Aleutians, to the North Slope, all over Alaska collecting specimens. And then remember she would send seeds to people all over the world, and she would get seeds back from them. So she didn't go to college. This was something that she became very, very immersed in and really knew. Her yard was always one that was in the parade of homes when we would have those, and people would go around and look at other people's yard and how wonderful they were. Also, when I was very young, around about this age, as can you tell which one I am? Up in the left. Anyway, I remember babysitting for my Uncle Dick's and my Uncle Bud's children, and I wasn't much bigger than they were, but that I babysat for them at that time. Yeah, there was a lot of cousins. That wasn't all of them. And I wanted to show you this photo because this was in Grandma's back porch, and the thing was in those days, because who could have afford a photographer? So you'd sit on the freezer, the chest freezer, and there was a sheet hanging on the back wall, and you can see the folds of the sheet sometimes there. And anyway, that was the photo shoot. My sister and me, my sister Marianne and me. We spent a summer in Homer on my Uncle Bud's not ranch, anyways, property there, and they had a very tiny house, and we lived in a camping trailer and a tent for the summer. My father was working farther down the road at he was a plumber, so he was working at this military thing that was down at the end of the road. You just can tell how much I knew about it. I don't know what the name of it was. But anyway, during that summer, we were there, and one of the big things that my father did for the property while we were there was to build a 2-seater outhouse. And so, that was pretty uptown. And then a couple of the things that summer too, that once a week my mother would somehow get the car and we would go into town, into Homer, because this was, it seemed like forever from downtown Homer. It was maybe 5 miles, but it was a long way. And we'd go into town. My mother would do the laundry. We would get to go to have ice cream and sometimes to the library. Oh, what a trip that was. The only other things that there were to read there were my Aunt Jean's collection of those abbreviated books, not reduced. Yes, those Reader's Digest things. Oh, I read some stuff I probably shouldn't have, but that was all there was to read. And I was really a reader, so I read them. So at the conclusion of that summer, my dad's job wasn't done yet, but my sister and I needed to go back to Anchorage to go to school, and we were in the 4th and 6th grade. So we stayed at Grandma's and walked to Chugach School, which was a Quonset hut at that time in our classroom. And so when we got all signed up for school, and we couldn't call my parents, they didn't have a phone. So the wall at Grandma's hanging on the phone hanging on the wall there. So I called the radio station. Was it like Thunder Telegraph or some such thing? And called, and so I could give get word to my parents that we'd started school, we liked our teachers, that sort of thing. Well, I apparently went on and on. Finally, the person on the other end said, honey, we only have a couple minutes for this, and so you're going to have to wrap it up. But our parents learned that we'd gotten enrolled in school, and all was well. This picture is my sister and me, and a dog that kind of was around in the neighborhood that we decided was ours, and we named him King. And so he hung around for a little bit, and we tried to feed him. My mother kept shooing him away, and finally he was shooed away. But these snowsuits were ones that my mother made for us. And I could no more make a snowsuit for my child than fly to the moon. But she made snowsuits for us, and these were the days, too, that the Anchorage School District prohibited girls from wearing pants to school. So you have to shove our dresses into these snow pants, and by the time you got to school, it was all wadded up and looked, not very good, but that was the way that things were. And we went to North Star School, went on the bus, and one of my 2 really great memories there were that we could play in the woods, and so we would kind of twine together, twist together like willow branches and such to make play spaces and houses and that sort of thing. The kind of thing that nobody would ever be able to do today. You don't have woods around schools where kids can play. So, that was, I think that was really a kind of a treasure for us. Also, there was an ice skating pageant. We all had to ice skate, and in the ice skating pageant, my biggest fear was that as we held hands and skated quite slowly around the break that I would not fall. And I didn't. And so the ice skating pageant was a hit as far as I was concerned. This was also the time of the volcano. And there was all this ash all over the place, and we lived over on what's Mackenzie Street, and the ash was so wonderful to play in, and you could lift up leaves and see the imprint left in the ash, and we thought it was just fabulously wonderful. Of course, none of our parents did, because it was a big mess all the time. But one thing, too, when it started to get dark, and we, because we lived way out of town then, in Turnagain. My mother put us all in the car and took us to her mother's house because, that was where she felt safe and knew that we would all be safe as well. My grandparents liked to take us on treks and on little jaunts. There was driving to Palmer was something that we did frequently, and I remember, I think this is an accurate memory, that one time when we were in Palmer, we got someplace and we were going to have ice cream, and the only kind of ice cream they had was the kind that we got, and that was pistachio ice cream. So that was what we had in Palmer, was pistachio ice cream. I included this photo. Some of you may know Sven Johansson. My father worked with him. He had just come from Sweden not long before that, and I was in the second grade, and my teacher, Miss Leah Hoffman, and Sven, I thought they should get paired up and probably get married, because neither of them was married, and I thought that would be a good idea. So for some reason, I got to bring Sven to class, and then he and Miss Hoffman danced the schottisch or something, and that was kind of the end of it, but I thought it was really a good idea. and you know how Alaska and Alaskans make sometimes odd connections. Well, this is an odd connection that I want to tell you about. I don't know if you recognize the man in the middle of that group, but it's Governor Brown, Governor Pat Brown of California. And so I'm somewhat older here. That time when I talked about being at Chugach School in the sixth grade, we went back to California then, and I didn't come back until later, and tell you about that in a minute. But so we were in California, and the Olympics were being held at Lake Tahoe, and Sven Johansson was racing in the Olympics as a cross-country skier. So we thought, oh, fabulous, we'll go and see him. And on the way, we were stopped and saw this black car stopped, and Governor Brown got out, and we said, oh, well, hello, Governor Brown, and can we take a picture with you? So that's what that's about. And then back to my grandmother's house, because, I'd left. I came back for my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary and was in my aunt's backyard, and I just felt so at home, like I had not felt any other time that I'd been in California. So I was in a graduate program at San Francisco State, but the next summer I came to Alaska. I was just going to stay for the summer because I really had that home feeling. And, I never left. Here I still am. But I wanted to tell you a story, too. When I came back that summer, some of you may know another uncle of mine, Pat Ryan, my father's younger brother. And so Uncle Pat worked for Uncle Wally. And Uncle Pat said to me one day, we were at some event, and he said, Abbe, he said, God damn it, I just got people convinced that Wally and I weren't related, and you show up and call us both uncle. So around about that time, Willie said I had to tell you this next part, and I was kind of, I was thinking about the train trestle story with my mother and her sisters, and one of my cousins, Jack Hickle, convinced me that we should go skydiving. And so we did. So that's my connection to the train trestle story, was jumping out of an airplane 9 times. And then this is about the time that Willie and I met. And when I brought him home to Grandma, I knew that she liked him because she had learned that he didn't like green peppers. And so she very carefully omitted the green peppers from the salad. So he passed muster in her mind. My Aunt Emily was a little bit different story, though. When I first told her that Willie and I were going to get married, she said, oh, Abigail. And we never did quite know whether it was because he was divorced, not a Catholic, or whether it was because he was a Democrat. So here we are, we're still married, and he's still a Democrat. And this is a photo of our children and most of our grandchildren. There were 2 more to come, but this was the most recent one that I had of everybody together. And I just wanted to show you that our kids are carrying on the tradition that, that Willie and I are living, and that my grandparents have lived, my parents have lived here in Anchorage. Our children love and like each other. Their children, the cousins, play together. A couple of years ago, I asked one of our grandchildren, I asked him about another one. I said, so is Emmett your friend? And he said, he's not my friend, he's my cousin. It makes me happy that my children and their children, as I said, like each other, like to be together, and that they really are carrying on so many of the traditions of Anchorage and of Alaska. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Abbe. What a beautiful family. And all I can say is we appreciate all of your dedication to children and families in this state. Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is going to be Laurie McKeown. Laurie was born and raised in Anchorage. She attended Dimond High School and graduated from UAA in 2001 with a degree in psychology. She is employed at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, where she has worked in data analysis for more than 10 years. Her family history is that her father first came to Alaska in 1955 and has been here ever since. While growing up, Laurie spent a deal of her time as a child camping and fishing all over south central and interior Alaska. And not just casually camping, but roughing it in tents. I think that's pretty good, a tent. Sometimes far away from any real civilization. And her father is the reason she will be telling us her story tonight. Now, these days, Laurie prefers to stay a bit closer to home. She enjoys running, cooking, and reading. Laurie has been actively involved in Toastmasters for nearly 12 years and is a member of the Great Land Toastmasters Club that meets here every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Laurie is passionate about helping others gain confidence through public speaking and leadership opportunities that Toastmasters provides. And tonight, Laurie is here to put her Toastmasters speaking skills to the test as she entertains us with her tale of an 11-day rafting adventure in Alaska's wilderness. Please give Laurie a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to be here tonight to tell you my 11-day rafting adventure on the West Fork of the Gulkana River. It was June of 1992, the summer that I turned 12 years old. Now, given my age, you might guess that I was not the mastermind behind this adventure we were about to partake upon. You would be right. My 3 adult companions that came with me on this trip were my father's good friend Gary, and Gary's lovely fiancée Christy, plus 2 dogs. We had about a 100-mile, river mile journey in front of us from where we would put in our rafts to where we would take out in the community of Sourdough along the Richardson Highway. Needless to say, we needed to put down a lot of mileage each day in order to make sure that we would return on time. And as I mentioned, this was in 1992. We did not carry cell phones with us, and even if we had, we were far too remote to have gotten any sort of reception. If we had had any sorts of problems where we needed help, we wouldn't have had a cell phone to call anyone. We started out our journey about 70 air miles northwest of the community of Tulsana along the Glen Highway. I call it out in the middle of nowhere, and it really was. This was an unnamed lake we were flown into by float plane in 2 beaver loads with 11 days worth of provisions, 4 people and 2 dogs. We spent a lovely day that first day. It was nice and sunny on this unnamed lake. And then the next day our journey was to begin. Our first little adventure came when we realized that the small stream that we were to put our rafts in on to access the West Fork of the Gulkana River was too small to get actual rafts through. And although it was only about 1/3 of a mile, the adults, namely the men, spent most of the day portaging our gear, our 11 days of provisions, to the sandbar where the West Fork of the Gulkana was that we were to start rafting upon. So we lost a day just in the beginning, but we did have a lovely campsite on the sandbar right there at the confluence of this small stream and the West Fork of the Gulkana River. The next day, our real journey would finally begin, where we would embark on our 2 rafts, my father and I and our dog in the one raft, Gary and Christy in the other raft, as well as their dog. And all was well and good until several river miles down, we encountered an obstacle. A tree had fallen all the way across the river, and the river up that far is only about 10 to 20 feet across, if you're thinking about it, depending on how shallow or how deep it is. So we were like, okay, what do we do now? We need to keep going. We're already a day behind. The only way to do it was to park our rafts on the riverbank, get out all our gear, portage it around that tree, and reload the rafts. Now, this setback might have been okay if it hadn't been for another log, and another log, and another log. After 2 or 3 logs, the guys finally figured, well, we're just going to have to start cutting these things down because other rafters coming through later in the year will probably appreciate the fact that they won't have to do this work later on. That day, we cut down or portaged around 13 logs. We did not set up camp until nearly midnight. Everybody was exhausted, but we had even more fun that night because the inhabitants of our little camp spot were none too happy that we were there. A family of owls kept making noise, and every opportunity they had, they were buzzing over our heads, and they were so glad when we left the next day, and we were sort of glad to leave their home too. The next day started out just fine until the rafting troubles began. You see, my dad's friend Gary had been so excited about this rafting trip that 3 months before it began, he went out and found the very first raft and bought the very first raft he found at Costco for dirt cheap. When you're going in the Alaskan wilderness, it's probably best to get something that can withstand the unforgiving bottoms of the rivers. This raft did not. Water started coming into Gary's raft. There were holes in the bottom of it. We had to stop on a sandbar and patch up that raft if we were going to go any farther. And just to add to the fun, it was raining and chilly out that day, so we had to set up a tarp on the sandbar that we made camp on and patch up the raft and give it 24 hours before we could go on our journey. By this time, we were many, many miles behind where we needed to be if we were to make our trip in 11 days as originally planned. So we set out about noon the next day. And 100 yards from where we set out that day, Gary encountered another problem with his raft. The air chamber popped on a rock that jutted out, a sharp rock that jutted out from the surface of the river. His raft was popped. Great, we're camping at the next sandbar, which was right across the river from where we camped last night. Now we're stuck for 24 hours yet again because we have to patch up this raft and let it dry before it can get into water again. Okay, now everybody's a little frustrated, everybody's tired, we're worried about how in the heck we're going to get home on time without worrying everyone back home because we had no cell phones to call them on. Set out again the next day. The way we typically did things was my dad and I would go first on the raft, and just behind us, Gary and Christy were on their raft. After a while, we noticed we hadn't seen or heard from them in at least a half an hour. And usually they were at least within earshot of us. We were a little afraid that they might have encountered some difficulties, so we knew it was time to stop at the next sandbar along the way. So we started a little fire, and we started to bring out some gear to set up camp if we needed to. And a little while later, we hear Christy's voice yelling, "Watch out for floorboards!" That's right, the floorboards in the bottom of Gary's raft were falling out and floating down the Gulkana River, not to be retrieved by any humans. That's right, Gary's raft no longer had a bottom to it. It was effectively a giant inner tube. Change of plans. We have at least 5 days ahead of us on this journey at this point. Now what are we to do? That then meant that the only person that could use this useless raft was Gary, and that useless raft could not carry any gear any longer. That meant that my dad, myself, Christy, 2 dogs, and all of our camping gear had to be piled up on top of the one remaining good raft that we had to continue on this journey. And I will never forget, and I still have pictures of Gary on his inner tube of a raft. He had 1 foot on the left chamber, 1 foot on the right air chamber, and he was using his paddle, his oar, to steer this thing around these curves and these bends the whole rest of the way of the trip. Now, thankfully, we did have some putt-putt motors with us, which proved to be quite useful along the way when the water later got deep enough to use them, and we were able to put down some significant miles. Now, folks, you may be wondering, wasn't this kind of a bomb of a trip? Isn't it one of those things you might just sort of want to forget about? Why are you even talking about it? It sounds awful. Well, friends, I'm here to tell you we actually had a wonderful time in many ways, despite all of the challenges. I will never forget some of the wildlife I saw. I saw the one and only, to this day, wolverine I have ever seen. And many of you who have been here a long time know that wolverines tend to be rather reclusive creatures, and you don't get to see them very often. That was cool. Then there was the day we were peacefully floating down the river, and all of a sudden I hear my dad say, "Laurie, there goes 1 grizzly, 2 grizzlies, 3 grizzlies, 4 grizzlies!" 30 feet in front of us, out in the river, popped a mama and 3 of her cubs. But just as soon as that mama saw us coming her way, she did a quick 180 and she hightailed it up that bank, her babies in tow. And thank goodness that happened and that we didn't get quite close enough for a picture, because that was a little close for even my comfort. Still a pretty cool event, though. And then there was another day we were peacefully floating down the river, and about 50 feet in front of us, we could see in the trees along the riverbank 2 sets of eyes staring at us from the trees. Those sets of eyes belonged to 2 big, beautiful wolves. My first encounter with actual real wolves outside of captivity. Thankfully, as we got closer, they sort of retreated off into the woods. It was a little creepy, but quite cool at the same time. And the wildlife story I will never forget was one day when it was quite hot. As you may know, in interior Alaska in June, when it's sunny and gets quite warm, it can get pretty darn hot in the middle of the summer. We had a swarm of insects literally hatching off of the surface of the water and coming right at us. For at least an hour, several river miles, were these white grayish insects that looked like little moths. Although they weren't moths, they were called caddisflies. But we were in what I will call a snowstorm of caddisflies for at least an hour. We were covered, our raft was covered, our gear was covered, and we were so darn glad to get out of that swarm of insects. I'd never seen anything like it before that, nor have I ever seen anything like that since, and I hope that I never do again. We had some other good times too. We enjoyed our times as friends, talking around the campfires at night. We had a lot of good laughter. And to this day, we have a lot of good things to look back on with this trip. We have a lot of laughs every time we talk about it and the challenges. Now we can laugh at it, even though it was difficult at the time. So all in all, it was a very good time. And perhaps our biggest blessing was that we somehow, miraculously, did make it within the 11 days we had allotted for ourselves, thanks to our putt-putt motors. Nobody got ill. Nobody had any injuries to speak of. Things really could have been a lot worse. It really was a trip for the books. And friends, I'd just like to leave you with a few final thoughts. If you ever decide you'd like to embark upon some similar rafting adventure in the remote Alaskan wilderness, number one, talk to somebody who has done that trip before you. Ask them about any particular challenges they may have encountered. Heed their advice. They would have no reason to lie to you if they ever encountered challenges. Number two, expect the unexpected. The Alaskan wilderness can be quite unforgiving, and you might want an extra day or two built into your trip, because you never know what might happen. And number three, by golly, please do not go out and buy the cheapest raft that you can find. Please do the research, buy something that can take some pounding on the bottom as far as the rocks and the grit is concerned, because in an Alaskan rafting adventure, you will need it. Trust me, you would not want to be floating for 5 days on an inner tube going down a river when you have no communication with the outside world. Thank you.
Isn't she captivating? Oh my gosh, I think she gets a Toastmasters award. Pardon me?
Did they get married? The fiancé and the...
Oh, did the two get married?
Actually, they did not.
I think it was the raft Gary bought. Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you, Laurie. Fun. Okay, our gift shop is open. We're going to take a quick break here in just a minute. I would like, if our chefs are ready to come out, are our chefs? They're gone? They tried to wait, but anyway, I would like to just say thank you to Christopher Knight, Tim Washington, and William Huru. And William is our new pastry chef, and I hope you enjoyed your dinner tonight. I will tell them that you applauded.